In 1988, Julie Ward embarked on an African odyssey, driven by a passion for wildlife photography. Yet, just before her journey's end, she vanished without a trace. Her inexplicable disappearance ignited a 35-year crusade led by her father, dedicated to uncovering the haunting truth behind her untimely demise. This is the disturbing case of Julie Ward. Julie Ann Ward was born on April 20, 1960, in Suffolk, England. Julie grew with her two younger brothers, Tim and Bob, and her parents, John and Jan Ward. Her father, John Ward, was a successful businessman in the hospitality industry and owned a chain of hotels, which allowed the family to live a comfortable life in England. Growing up, Julie was described by her family as a beautiful, intelligent, and kind girl. Julie loved animals and had a passion for photography. It is this combination of interests that led her to take a year off from her job as a publisher's assistant in Suffolk, England, to pursue her passion. At the age of 28, on 7th February 1988, Julie left her home in England, accompanied by 26 other travelers, for a 7-month overland trip to Kenya to photograph wildlife. She had hoped to capture the annual migration of wildebeest in the Maasai Mara region by the end of her trip. While staying in Nairobi, Julie met an elderly couple, Paul and Natasha Dixon. The couple had a huge estate and would often rent out their grounds as a campsite to travelers. They had taken a liking to Julie, who shared their love for dogs and allowed Julie to camp on their grounds for much of July. She later rented a cottage from the couple's neighbor in August. On 2nd September 1988, Julie and her Australian friend, biologist Glenn Burns, drove to Maasai Mara in her second-hand Suzuki Jeep, which she had bought in Nairobi. They had planned to watch the annual wildebeest migration from neighboring Tanzania's G National Park into the Mara. They set up a camp at the Sand River campground. The next day, the two drove across the park, but were interrupted in their travels by their Jeep breaking down near Mara Serena Lodge. A tour truck, driven by a man named Stephen Watson, towed them to Mara Serena Lodge. They stayed at the lodge for the day and had hoped to return to Nairobi the next day. Their bad luck continued, however, as they soon found out their Jeep could not be fixed in time, as there was a problem with the fuel pump, which had to be replaced. As Glenn had to attend a conference the next day at the Nairobi Museum, he flew to Serengeti's the next day, leaving Julie behind. Glenn, however, took the faulty fuel pump and promised to send a replacement. He sent the replacement pump on 5th September. However, it arrived late in the day, so Julie spent another night at the Mara Serena Lodge. On September 6th, at about midday, Julie left Serena Lodge for Sand River Campground on September 6th. Around midday, Julie left Serena Lodge for Sandy River Campground. She was going there to collect the 2 tents that she and Glenn Burns had left on site 3 days prior. And after grabbing the gear, her intention was to head to Nairobi. David Nchoko, a clerk at the Sand River Campground, saw Julie at around 2 p.m. inside the campground. She dismantled the 2 tents and paid the extra charges for the tent. She then left the campground at 2:30 p.m., driving off towards Kikarok Lodge on her way to Nairobi. Police Constable Gerald Karori, who said he helped Julie dismantle the tent, also witnessed her leaving around 2:30 p.m. and said that she left in her Jeep alone. This was the last supposed sighting of Julie Ward. Julie had booked a plane ticket to England on 10th September, and before she was to leave, she had planned to spend some time with Dixons. When Julie did not show up on the 6th and the 7th, they got worried and contacted local hospitals and police stations along the Nairobi-Mara Road, fearing that Julie might have been in an accident. When she did not appear for her flight on the 10th, Dixons reported her missing and notified Julie's father, John Ward. John took a flight to Kenya, arriving on 12th of September. By this point, Julie had been missing for 6 days. John organized a search for his daughter with his own money, with the help of the Weld Dixons and a few friends Julie made while living in Kenya. Using 5 aircrafts, they meticulously combed through the vast expanse of the Maasai Mara Reserve, tirelessly searching for any trace of Julie or her car. The search effort proved fruitful, as on Tuesday, 13th September, Julie's Jeep was found abandoned in a gully at a stream known as Makindu in the Mara. However, there was no sign of Julie. Police were immediately notified of the Jeep's presence. Among the items found inside the car were a map, 2 bottles of beer, a pair of binoculars, and some personal belongings. John found the location of the car odd, given that it was off the road and appeared to be heading towards the river. However, a SOS written in the dust on the roof of the Jeep filled him with hope that perhaps Julie had a car breakdown again and decided to walk on foot. Later that same day, Chief Game Warden Simon Makala stumbled upon a suspicious burnt-out campfire near the Olaimutiek Gate, discovering human remains amidst the ashes. John rushed to the scene. In the ashes, he found a left leg, jaws, spinal column, and lock of hair. The skull was found in a nearby bush a month later. The rest of the body appeared to have been burnt to ashes. John, in a later interview, said, "The fire was about 4 feet in diameter. In it, there was a mug, some burnt sunglasses, and film cassettes. Even though I knew it had to be Julie, I wanted to go through the ashes to see if there was something I could find and identify. The odor was one of burnt flesh. The fire itself was black and oily. I could find nothing that I could identify. The gathered evidence was peculiar, lacking any signs of a struggle and blood. There was also a faint smell of petrol. The first autopsy was done by Kenyan police pathologist Dr. Adele Shaker, who confirmed that the remains were that of Julie Ward. In his report, Dr. Shaker noted that, among other things, the remains had been cut using a sharp implement, and there was a subsequent attempt to burn them. For him, this pointed towards a case of homicide. However, the official investigation into Julie's death presented conflicting narratives. While Dr. Shaker unequivocally deemed Julie's death a homicide, stating the leg was cleanly cut and drenched in petrol before being set on fire, the police disputed this conclusion. Instead, they proposed a theory suggesting Julie was struck by lightning and subsequently mauled by a wild animal such as lions. When a copy of the autopsy report was eventually seen by John Ward, it was crudely altered, with words crossed out or typed over. John said where Dr. Shaker had typed cleanly cut as far as the leg and jaw were concerned, these words had been changed to torn and cracked. You are starting to talk about an attack by animals and not human beings. It was later found that the autopsy results had been altered by Dr. Shaker's boss, Dr. Jason Kaviti, a health advisor to the Kenyan government. In a later interview, Dr. Shaker said, "He took the report. I heard him saying, 'No, no, no,' and saw him underline through some words. I saw him underline through the words, 'cleanly cut.' He said it was only my opinion. I wasn't happy about this, but Dr. Kaviti was my boss." John took Julie's remains to England, and a second post-mortem, carried out by Professor Austin Gresham in England, confirmed Dr. Shaker's findings. According to the investigating police officer in charge of the case, Superintendent Muchiri Wanjao speculated that Julie Ward may have been depressed and gone on to commit suicide, and further suggested that Julie was sexually promiscuous. Dr. Shaker said Wanjao told him that Julie was a loose girl. He talked of sancide and how she could have cut herself up and lit a fire which spread. Kenyan investigators were reluctant to call the death a murder and refused to conduct a homicide investigation. John Ward accused the Kenyan government of wanting to cover up a murder in order to protect the country's tourism industry. John Ward decided to launch an investigation of his own. Over the years, he has made several trips in a desperate search for the truth. Following the discrepancies in the autopsy report, an inquest was held into Julie Ward's death in Nairobi. During the inquest, when questioned about the alterations into Julie Ward's death, Dr. Kaviti faulted Dr. Shaker's English, arguing that the Egyptian's command of the English language was poor, and his own motive in altering the report was for purposes of precision. Yet, at the same hearing, Dr. Kaviti further admitted that out of hundreds of autopsy reports Dr. Shaker had written in the past, this was the first time his lack of English decision had necessitated the editing of his report. The inquest also heard the findings of Professor Austin Gresham, who confirmed Dr. Shaker's findings, stating that the injuries on Julie's jaw and skull indicated she had been decapitated from behind with a sharp blade. The magistrate eventually concluded that Julie was murdered by a person or persons unknown. However, he ordered that no further investigation was required. In February 1990, at John Ward's urging, the UK Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd sanctioned an inquiry by Scotland Yard investigators who subsequently travelled to Kenya to probe Julie Ward's case. The initial investigation led to the conclusion that two park rangers, Peter Capine and John Magaroy, were responsible for the murder. The investigation revealed evidence placing Julie at the gate post. Both rangers had been in Maasai Mara Reserve that day, linking them to the scene. However, during the trial, confusion arose regarding the clerk and police constable's testimonies. The clerk, David Nchoko, and police constable Gerald Karori, who were the last people to see Julie when she left Sand River Campground towards Nairobi, came under suspicion during the inquest when the Scotland Yard investigators were able to prove that Julie's signature had been forged. The clerk, David, had entered Julie Ward's details in the gate register and signed against her name to make it appear that she had signed herself out of the game reserve. Initially, David remained adamant that Julie Ward had signed herself out and left the Mara. After handwriting, experts confirmed that that was not Julie Ward's handwriting. David admitted that actually he had made the entry and signed against Julie Ward's name afterwards, not because he wanted to create the impression that she had left Mara when he knew she had not, but because he had forgotten to give her the register to sign when she was leaving, and since she had already left, he was forced to sign on her behalf to save himself from possible disciplinary action for lacking vigilance in his work. While both the clerk and police constable claimed they saw the woman leave the campground alone, in 2004, 16 years after Julie's death, an unnamed witness told the investigators that they had seen an armed man in military fatigues sitting in Julie's car. Despite this, all four individuals, the two park rangers, the clerk, and the police constable, were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. 6 years later, in 1998, the chief warden of the reserve, Simon Makalla, became a suspect after it was found that he hadn't ordered a search for Julie by any of the 113 rangers under his command. At 11 a.m., on the day Julie's jeep was spotted, Makalla was informed immediately. However, rather than swiftly heading to oversee the ground search, Makalla drove 50 kilometers in the opposite direction to Serena Lodge. Not until mid-afternoon did Makalla eventually reach the scene. By then, more than 30 individuals, including rangers, police, and council workers, had already been there and departed for the search. Before towing away the vehicle, police removed Julie's personal belongings and transported them to the Sand River Police Post for safekeeping. Among the items removed were maps, a pair of trainers, 2 bottles of beer, binoculars, and various other items like tents and sleeping bags. When Makalla finally arrived at 3 p.m., there was no one at the vehicle. However, during the trial of the two park rangers, McCullough told the judge that after he arrived at the scene, he peeked inside the vehicle and claimed he saw some maps, a pair of trainers, 2 bottles of beer, a pair of binoculars. These items had already been removed by the police 3 hours before he arrived. Therefore, investigators noted he must have had prior information about the Jeep. Suspicions also grew that someone else had driven the car to the location where it was found. It seemed suspicious that Julie had decided to turn off the main road, drive across the trackless, rock-strewn bush before attempting to drive through a deep gully while the much safer-than-paved road was nearby. This casted further focusing suspicions on McCullough. McCullough claimed that he did not drive a vehicle and had never driven a vehicle. However, several witnesses, including his own driver, claimed that McCullough often took over the driving. In fact, he even drove John Ward during the initial search for Julie. The police discovered records of a motor accident involving a vehicle McCullough was driving. Moreover, McCullough had radioed at 4:26 p.m. that he had found Julie's remains. It was found that McCullough had left the gully where Julie's Jeep was found at 4 p.m. It took him only 26 minutes to cover the 10-kilometer journey in a southeasterly direction, a desolate corner of the Maasai Mara. Despite retracing McCullough's path, the police discovered that the quickest journey from the gully to the site of Julie's remains took precisely 26 minutes. This would mean that he traveled directly from Julie's abandoned car to her remains. The area where Julie's hacked and decomposing body was discovered had no tracks leading to it, and it is identifiable only by a distinctively shaped large tree set among dozens of other smaller trees and bushes. The hidden and secret nature of the environment in which Julie was discovered contradicted McCullough's claim that his search was merely that of chance. His story of finding of Julie's remains randomly was met by much public and private speculation. Those close to the case say such insider knowledge suggests he probably had prior information of the specific location. McCullough claimed he had been led by vultures circling in the sky. It was pointed out that you could not see an elephant at that distance, much less the speck of vultures circling in the sky. A Swiss TV crew had offered their assistance using 5 radio-equipped vehicles in the search for Julie. However, McCullough told them to mind their own business. The crew had heard rumors about Jonathan Moy, the son of the then Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, being seen with a group of men in the park. The Swiss crew recorded their account at McCullough's office before leaving Kenya. They said that they found McCullough sitting head in his hands, mentioning he had been summoned to a meeting with President Moi. Just days after Julie's remains were found, McCullough disappeared from his post at the park. At first, the official line was that he was on leave, but it was later found he was suspended. He never returned to his position of senior warden of the Maasai Mara Game Reserve. One afternoon, while John Ward was in Kikarok Lodge, he met a woman who told him that the man who killed your daughter is Jonathan Moy. She said she had heard the allegations about Jonathan Moy everywhere in the park, particularly in the nearby village where Julie's remains were discovered. Later, a letter was sent from Kenya to the UK in which an unidentified writer recounted an incident from September 1988, the exact same time Julie went missing. The writer, employed at Kikarok Lodge, described standing near the lodge's petrol station, waiting for transportation to her home. She mentioned witnessing 3 men dragging a white woman from a Land Rover into the government guest house, which was reserved for heads of state and VIPs only. Substantiating this further, in 1992, Valentine Uhuru Kodipo, part of a secret militia allegedly paid by President Moi to target his political adversaries, claimed in an interview that Julie was killed at Jonathan Moy's direction in the presence of others. The Kenyan government refuted the existence of such a training camp and denied Kodipo's employment by them. In September 1995, Kodipo spoke openly to the UK Daily Mail, stating that he witnessed Julie's murder. He asserted that Jonathan Moy ordered the murder after allegedly sexually assaulting her. Jonathan Moy denied any involvement in the case. He claimed he was on his family farm at Eldama Ravine, 250 kilometers away from Mara at the time of Julie's death. He denied knowing Julie or ever meeting her. Due to his status and lack of evidence, nothing could link him to the crime, and therefore no investigation was made. Valentine Uhuru Kodipo fled Kenya in fear for his life after this and lived in exile until his death. Some suggested she might have witnessed illicit activities and was consequently killed for what she knew. Others proposed that she could have been working for British intelligence, having taken photos of militia camps in the Mara, saying that could easily lead to her murder in the desert. In 1997, the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, Kenya, appointed a new team of investigators to examine the evidence in Julie's case, and Makala was charged with Julie's murder. It was evident that Makala had not only deceived about his awareness of the items in Julie's vehicle, but also about knowing the whereabouts of her remains and covering up her murder. Despite this, he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. In 2012, John Ward published a report in Nairobi Law Monthly, claiming that Jonathan Moy killed Julie. He gave all the information he had gathered over the years. In the report, he revealed that in 2009, former Superintendent Muchiri Wanjau, who had suggested the Julie's death, was a side contact him to talk to him about Julie's murder. Wanjau had claimed that after interviewing a number of people, rangers and police, he had suspected Jonathan Moy for Julie's murder. However, when he went to his senior with this information, he told him to look somewhere else. He said he was forced to change his story and avoid any mention that Julie was murdered. He also claimed that Makala was not involved in her murder and that he was told to get rid of the body, but he didn't kill her. Wanjau said that he wanted to meet John again and show him some papers on many people, but John never heard from him again. He was later told that Wanjau had died. In the report, he also talked about an informant who had past ties with Jonathan Moy, shared details and presented photographs of himself with Jonathan. The informant alleged that on September 6, 1988, Jonathan, accompanied by his farm manager, bodyguards, and a driver, encountered Julie along their route through the Maasai Mara. A conversation turned aggressive, resulting in Julie being sexually assaulted by Jonathan. The informant claimed that fearing Julie might report the assault, Jonathan instructed his bodyguards to kill her. The informant disclosed names and locations of the bodyguards, the driver, and the witness, the farm manager to the assault. Additionally, he mentioned the farm. Manager Ibrahim Choge was married to one of President Moy's daughters and was a close friend of Jonathan. Ibrahim supposedly distanced himself from Jonathan due to the events in the Maasai Mara. Allegedly, during an argument between the two, Ibrahim was heard to shout at Jonathan in anger, "One day I will blacken your name around the world for what you did to that girl in the Mara." In 1999, Ibrahim was killed in a car accident. When John Ward met Ibrahim's father, his father claimed that Ibrahim was not a victim of car accident, but that he had been murdered. He said that an autopsy report revealed marks on Ibrahim's wrists, resembling rope imprints, and significant bruises on his body, indicating severe blunt force trauma. The doctor suspected Ibrahim had likely been suspended by his wrists and beaten, fatally damaging his spleen. He recounted details from a witness who saw a wooden log placed across the road, causing Ibrahim's car to swerve and crash. The witness observed Ibrahim retrieving a briefcase from the car before being attacked by 3 hooded men which she initially thought was a robbery. Despite authorities labeling Ibrahim's death as an accident, his father believed his son was murdered. He believes that Ibrahim was about to reveal what he knew about Julie's murder and was killed by Jonathan to keep him quiet. John also reported that in 2004, a former Kenyan intelligence officer disclosed witnessing Julie Ward's brutal murder in an anonymous interview with a Kenyan newspaper. He claimed that 3 men in the reserve sexually assaulted and murdered her. The officer detailed how Julie was coerced to drive her jeep miles away from the Sand River camp, positioning it in a gully. She was then forced to create an SOS mark in dust on the roof of her car, suggesting an accident and a plea for help. The officer admitted being too frightened to intervene at the time and remained fearful of coming forward even later. In 2018, John Ward asked the authorities to get the DNA of Jonathan Moy to confirm if he was responsible for his daughter's murder. However, nothing came out of it. In 2019, Jonathan Moy died of pancreatic cancer. His father passed away 2 months later. With the death of both men, John hoped those who previously felt afraid to speak up would now summon the courage to come forward. John Ward dedicated 35 years of relentless pursuit in seeking justice for his daughter's killer. His commitment led to over 200 trips to Kenya, spending more than £2 million of his own money. In his tireless quest, he meticulously gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, dug out a latrine near the scene of the crime in case any of Julie's possessions were thrown there, and even preserved DNA in his own freezer. Through the shadows of uncertainty, his resolve stood unshaken. Each inquiry a testament to his unwavering quest. He didn't give up the chase till the very end. Tragically, John Ward passed away on June 7, 2023, shortly after his wife Jan's burial on May 25th. After John's death, his sons Bob and Tim said they would continue their father's mission in both his and Julie's honor.